Hello, my name is Vera, and I am a massive Witcher fan. I have grown up with the books, I've played the video games, and man, don't you guys think that this is a great story that would work really well in adaptation? Oh, wait.
Let's go. Geralt. Mine.
Well, okay. Maybe not like that. With the release of The Witcher on Netflix season 4, I've been really thinking more and more and more about how could this adaptation have been better? How could we have adapted it from the start, going all the way back to season 1, and created a more viable product that really shared the depth and complexities of the Witcher books, while also maintaining the same rules as Netflix imposed on this series from the very beginning. So, welcome to this video, in which I will discuss how I think Netflix should have adapted season 1 of The Witcher. And while it's fun to go back in time and fix a few things in this thought experiment, there are some things you can fix right now, instantly, namely your online safety. Honestly, if you spend as much time online as I do, and let's be real, you're watching this video, well then you need something watching your back. Thankfully, with just one click, NordVPN encrypts your connection and keeps your personal info safe, whether you're at home or on public Wi-Fi. And if you haven't been keeping up with them recently, now's the time, because they've introduced some genuinely incredible new features, like threat protection, which blocks malware, trackers, and even those cursed pop-up ads that seem to be showing up more and more often. Plus, their dark web monitor allows you to enjoy 24/7 protection while alerting you if your credentials ever show up somewhere shady, like hacker forums or marketplaces. If you want to stay protected and also be able to access content from all around the world, be sure to check out nordvpn.com/Vera. With my link, you'll be able to get NordVPN's 2-year plan and 4 months extra for free. And it's totally risk-free as well, thanks to their 30-day money-back guarantee. Huge thank you to NordVPN for supporting the channel. Now let's get back to it. Now, a couple of big ideas about the actual structure of the season, because like I said, in this thought experiment, operate under this assumption that what if I had the same constraints as Lauren Schmidt Hissrich at the beginning of the series? So even if personally I would love to do 13 episodes and include every single short story, that would be perhaps too gratuitous for this endeavor, I think. So, season 1, 8 episodes, that's it. And also, I will have to combine both The Last Wish and The Sword of Destiny, just like they attempted to. And credit where credit is due, if there's one good thing that I can say about The Witcher Netflix is that at least they started with the right stuff. A lot of people I find go into The Witcher and think that Blood of Elves is the first thing you should read. It is not. And so they did start with the right stuff, you know, The Last Wish and then The Sword of Destiny. Now, in my perfect world, would I combine them into one season? Probably not, but to be honest, I'm not sure. On one hand, combining both of the first 2 books into one season allows you to get into the saga faster. In the saga, we tackle the bigger conflict, and it feels like a much more overarching story. But then again, at that point, it is very much a shared story between Geralt and Ciri, and a lot of people go into The Witcher expecting The Witcher, and so taking like a slower approach when adapting the source material would be better for viewers who want to ground themselves with Geralt. Since the Netflix team had to cut things down to fit in those 8 episodes, I'm going to cut it down as well. However, we are not doing the weird time jumping sort of structure that they employed. I think that was, I don't know, just trying to seem clever in a very superficial sense. And to be honest, it confused people more often than not. And it just seems a little bit bizarre as well, because the structuring of The Last Wish, the first book, really lends itself, I think, to a first season. And why is that? Well, the stories are not sequential chronologically, meaning they happen out of order that they actually did in the actual timeline. However, we have an overarching story, or at least on that hyperdiegetic level, that hyperdiegetic story, which is essentially Geralt healing in the Temple of Melitele after his Striga fight. It is only in Book 2, The Sword of Destiny, that the stories do become sequential chronologically. But even like that being said, the jump from Book 1 to Book 2, I don't think is really difficult to work around. And in trying to be honest, I do find that the time skips and like orientating yourself in the Sword of Destiny can be quite difficult sometimes because like a lot is happening. The character interactions really shift from story to story, but we aren't really sure ever the exact chronology and what exactly has happened in between the stories. So I think that something that I would really focus on if I was the showrunner would be adding in some dates, maybe aiding in that visual storytelling with the visuals, with the styling, the makeup, the changing of seasons. But anyway, let me know in the comments what you think. Would it be better to do like in your ideal world, would it be better to do a season 1 for The Last Wish and then season 2 for The Sword of Destiny? Or is this approach of combining the two into one season the best approach? Before we go into those 8 episodes, a few notes on the overall framing and kind of philosophy that I would have while going into scripting out and directing all the episodes. Firstly, there are so many extraneous novel storylines that were put in by Netflix, and they're all gone. Like I'm axing all of them because they are a major problem in my opinion with this adaptation. And so instead I'm going to be using the overarching story and embedded narratives format that Sapkowski uses in The Last Wish, because I think that this will really help, especially in the first season of the show, because it is so important that this story is told through Geralt's eyes, and having him sort of like telling these stories to Nenneke or whoever, one of the priestesses, or one of his friends, reminiscing with them as they visit him. That is really important, that we understand that we are seeing the stories through Geralt's eyes, and it also recenters it, I feel like, the story around Geralt. And like I said, a lot of people go into The Witcher wanting The Witcher, and so this framing that I'm going to use and the one that Sapkowski uses, I think will really enhance that feeling of this is The Witcher. And another reason why this is so important in this adaptation is because Netflix decided that Yennefer and Ciri were going to be main characters as well. And don't get me wrong, Ciri definitely becomes a main character later on in the series. Yennefer never does. But what I think they fail to understand, and something that I think is a huge downfall of this adaptation as well, especially for people who want to go into The Witcher for The Witcher, is that people only care about Yen and Ciri through Geralt. So if you don't care about Geralt because you haven't fleshed him out enough, then you're never going to care about his relationship to Yennefer. If you don't care about his relationship to Yennefer, you're probably not going to care about Yennefer very much, because she was written intentionally to be sort of like a subversion of what we expect for the female like love interest. And then if you don't care about Yen and Geralt's relationship, well then you're never going to care about the something more that finally makes it click. Ciri. And so if you don't care about Ciri, well then, like, she's the MacGuffin, you know, like the entire main saga is basically about her. So if you don't care about her, you don't care about the saga. And so do you see how this is like a pyramidal structure? And if you don't anchor it with Geralt and understand, like, through Geralt's eyes, why is Yen important? Why is Ciri important? Why is the conflict important through him? Like, no one is really going to care. Right? And I guess the final pillar of this philosophy that I'm going to be using when adapting, Sapkowski is very intentional with all his short stories. I think I make that abundantly clear in my hours-long summaries of those 2 books. Every single short story has such a specific purpose when it comes to building out either Geralt's character or the world, or Geralt's relationship to like other characters within the world. My intention with adapting these short stories would really be to focus on making sure that that purpose of the short story, whichever one it may be, really comes across in the episode that I have dedicated to it, because I felt like that was really lost in Netflix's version as well. Episode 1. The Witcher. We are starting out this season the same exact way that Sapkowski starts out the first Witcher book, with the first Witcher short story, with the titular short story of everything that's yet to come. And the reason for that is very simple. Contrary to popular belief, there is only one short story where the objective of the short story is just to kill the monster. There's only one of them. Every other short story quickly devolves into something else, like political or exploring a relationship, like undertones through the superficial story that we are getting. This is the only short story where it's literally just about a monster hunter killing monsters. It's what the people want. Let's start out The Witcher being a witcher. For those of you who don't know what the story is about, Geralt arrives in Vizima and gets into a tavern fight, after which the locals insult him for being a Rivian, and the guards arrest him. Thankfully though, since he is a witcher, he uses the Axii sign to calm them and is taken to Velerad, the castellan of the city. Geralt tells him that he is there because King Foltest offers money to deal with a monster haunting the old palace, and this monster is Foltest's daughter that was born from an incestuous relationship with his sister Ada, who died during giving birth, and thus the child was turned into a striga. Foltest believes she can be saved. Others within his court and in the town think she should be killed. There is a lot of back and forth about why is Geralt there? Is he there to lift the curse when so many have failed? Foltest actually, in one of my favorite scenes, comes to him under a disguise and basically begs him not to kill his daughter, but then agrees that should he do that in self-defense, then the king will have to exile him, obviously, but the father will spare him, basically, So Geralt agrees to try and lift the curse by keeping the striga out of the crypt throughout the night. Geralt battles the striga using signs and potions, which is where we get a display of what is a witcher, how they fight, and I think that since this is episode 1, this would be very useful for us to get a feel for. It would be very exciting, the centerpiece of the first episode as well. And ultimately, he survives the night by locking himself in the crypt. When the sun rises, the striga has transformed back into a girl, fights a little bit. Notably, she takes a chunk out of Geralt's neck, but the curse is broken. Geralt is badly wounded, but ultimately he has succeeded. Foltest rewards him. The princess lives, even though she is developmentally really behind and acts still like a little child. That's where the short story ends in the books. The little addition that I would have to this is we know in the books that Geralt, after this, because of his neck wound, goes to Elander, to the Temple of Melitele, to be healed there. And so episode 1, in my ideal adaptation, would end with him arriving at the Temple of Melitele in Elander. Like I already said, this first episode, its purpose and the short story's purpose is to show us what a witcher is, what the fighting style is like, what is Geralt's philosophy around his work. It shows that witchers aren't only killers, but saviors in some sense, I guess, because say what you will, but he did save Foltest's daughter, right, from being a monster till the end of her life. And so for those who don't already know what the profession of a witcher is, like those who originally read Sapkowski's short story in Fantastica, this will be serving that same introduction that the original readers had back in the day. On the other hand, it also does a little bit of world building by introducing us to the very basic politics of the land. Obviously, like I already said, we're in Temeria, we're in Vizima, we're meeting Foltest. He's one of the main kings in the northern kingdoms. There are some ties to Redania as well, and it allows us to have that framing of Geralt going off with this massive wound and being healed in the Temple of Melitele, which then will allow us to have that be our starting point for all the next episodes as he is healing and then telling us about another story that happened to him. Episode 2, The Lesser Evil. Now, I know that this is the short story that Netflix started with, and to be honest, as far as short stories go, I don't think it was a bad one to start with. That being said, they misrepresented it, but that can be said for every single short story they tried to adapt. But it's okay, we're going to fix this. The way that I would open up this episode is Geralt is being treated by Nenneke. There's some playful banter between them, etc., etc. But then starts the conflict that happens in the Voice of Reason interludes in the entirety of The Last Wish. So the main conflict there is that noblemen Falvik, Count of Moen, and Tales of Dorndal, who our Knights of the White Rose, come demanding that Geralt leave the temple, calling him a murderer because they call him like the Butcher of Blaviken, and they don't want the Butcher of Blaviken around an Elender. Nenneke fiercely defends him. She says that they should be reasonable. We can like even do a little bit of fan service by her saying like, oh man, like you guys should start listening to the voice of reason or something. Like he's injured. He's not going to be butchering people, but like wink, wink. You should use the voice of reason, you know, tying it back to the name of the short story in the books. Falvik and Tails leave them alone ultimately, but after they are alone, Geralt says that he will not be able to stay that long and that maybe he should be reasonable as well, because after all, he is like the Butcher of Blaviken or whatever. Or maybe Nenneke would ask him like, what did they mean about him being the Butcher of Blaviken? And then that would take Geralt and us, taking us into the story of how he got the moniker of being the Butcher of Blaviken. The reason why I'm choosing The Lesser Evil to be the next short story that we are introduced to is very important to Geralt's character, right? So we already had his introduction as a witcher, but now we need to have his introduction as like what his moral standing is, right? Like what sort of person he is. And in The Lesser Evil, we find out a lot about his philosophy. As we all know, the quote that is so famous from the series, the evil is evil, lesser, greater, middling, it's all the same, that's from this short story. We saw Geralt already with monsters, so now it's time to see the flip side of that. The Sword of Destiny has two blades, if you will, the monster side and the human side. So what is the story about? Geralt will arrive in Blaviken, bringing a dead Kikimora to claim a reward, but he finds that there isn't one. The village elder Caldemain suggests he shows it to the local wizard, Master Irion, who turns out to be Stregobor, a mage Geralt already knows and had an unpleasant encounter with. Stregobor is living in a tower in the town and asks Geralt for help. He says that he is hunted by a woman called Renfri. Stregobor explains that Renfri is a cursed princess, supposedly born under the curse of the Black Sun, which marked her as evil. He claims she has mutations and has killed numerous people. Geralt learns that Renfri was persecuted, nearly killed, turned to banditry after being betrayed by Stregobor and others. So essentially, Stregobor wants Geralt to kill Renfri, but Geralt refuses, saying that famous line of evil is evil, lesser, greater, middling. If I am to choose between one evil and another, I'd rather not choose at all. Then later, Geralt meets Renfri and her gang. She tells him Stregobor where he hears her side of the story. She tells him Stregobor ruined her life and plans to kill him. She tries to convince Geralt to join her or to kill Stregobor himself to stop the bloodshed. But Geralt, just like he refused this from Stregobor, he refuses this from Renfri. However, something very important, Renfri will mention the town of Tridam. And I'll get back to that in a second. Something that's very important and that has to appear throughout this entire story is that the town of Blaviken has to be preparing for a market day. They call it market day in the show and in the English translation, but it's more like a fair, you know, like a town fair, which is also a market. But in Polish, the word that they use is jarmark, and it's kind of a mixture of the two. Like it's supposed to be a really big event that everyone is in town for, etc., etc. And because of that, and because of maybe sometime earlier in the episode, someone will mention something about the massacre in Tridam, where the people were being massacred in the streets until an audience was granted. Geralt, in my version of this, would almost be acting like a Sherlock Holmes sort of character, trying to piece together like how is Stregobor and Renfri's meetup going to go if neither of them is willing to like really meet in person. Like, what is she going to do? And then slowly over the course of the episode, he will figure out that she wants to recreate the Tridam ultimatum by massacring people within that market fair until Stregobor comes down and stops it. But obviously, Stregobor has no intention of actually doing that. So the next day, when Geralt realizes all of this, he finds Renfri and her gang about to start the massacre at the market. But he confronts the gang, kills them all in a brutal fight, and then duels Renfri, where he mortally wounds her. Dying, she asks him to hold her. He does so silently, but as she dies, a dagger falls out. And this is really important because we really need to see Renfri as a big question mark. We have to not be scared of being in that unknown, which is something that I feel like Netflix is really uncomfortable of doing in the adaptation that we got. Anyway, Striga appears and says that he wants to dissect her body, just like all those, other girls that he and other mages were involved in experimenting on, but Geralt forbids it. The townspeople have no clue what was going on. They have no idea that Renfri was there to massacre them, and so they turn on Geralt, calling him a butcher, because from their perspective, he just showed up and started butchering people, the very thing that Renfri was actually planning to do. So Caldemain tells him to leave Blaviken and never return. There are two things that are very important to me when adapting the ending of this short story, and one of them is just to focus on the devastation of the ending, because it is a very traumatic ending, especially since it's another example of Geralt involving himself in the problems of humans, and instead of like being thanked for it or whatever, even though like he wasn't doing it for a contract or anything, but it's thrown back in his face. We'll get to that in a second, but that is actually also like how he became a witcher. His first monster that he killed was a human male, which was about to take advantage of a 13-year-old, and then that was thrown in his face. And if you want to know how that then later progressed, that's what Crossroads of Ravens is about, the new Witcher book. So go check it out if you're interested. So because of that, it's just like another cycle of, again, Geralt got involved. Again, it was thrown in his face. This should just really highlight like the pros and cons of like his philosophy of non-intervention. And then the other thing that we need to focus on in this adaptation would be, people usually forget the second part of the evil is evil quote, and it's the part where Renfri tells him that sometimes there's an even greater evil that makes the other evils like seem not so bad, and like you have to act in the face of that evil, which like is what he ends up doing, and which leads to the naming of the Butcher of Blaviken. I think that by the end of the second episode, you have a good idea of who Geralt is in his professional life, but also like just philosophically, where he stands, what made him, sort of thing. And so since we are already grounded with Geralt, we are able to start planting seeds for the actual main story that will be in the saga, with episode 3, A Question of Price.